This exercise was a bit of fun. So based on some questions that the audience asked about whether or not the AI can analyse images and video footage, the short answer is no, not on a free account, but if you sign up and pay for it, you get a few more features and no limit on how much analysis it can perform. So in this video we're going to work out first of all where this data came from, i.e. which ECU or telematics system produced this report. And likewise, we're also going to try and work out where this data came from. Presumably it's the same system because it's the same kind of report. But now that I have a paid subscription to ChatGPT, I can now ask it to analyse the testing videos that Trooper Paul submitted into evidence. And I'm also going to ask it to analyse the video where the tow truck driver rocked the Lexus free of the snow it was stuck in Mr. Reed's driveway, reversed it out onto the road, and then drove it up onto the flatbed, and then drove it back off the flatbed to adjust the position, and then drove it back onto the flatbed. And then after having ChatGPT analyse those two videos, I'm going to ask it if the expected event triggers from those videos matches either data sets. And if it does, then we can reasonably estimate that that data set is associated with a specific key cycle. So, how does ChatGPT handle the video footage? First of all, I had to clip it down to the exact footage that I wanted it to analyse. I broke down Trooper Paul's testing into 3 parts, just so I could remove lally blah blahing in between pauses. And so basically test 1 is where Trooper Paul reverses up fairly controlled and presses the brakes gently and stops in a fairly controlled manner. So then I upload this test, to which the AI says it will now analyse the video for vehicle movement patterns, brake timing, steering and vehicle stability, comparison to the alleged incident, and it breaks it down into frames capturing those events. Now I repeat the process for test 2 and test 3, and finally the tow truck video. Obviously the tow truck video segment was a little bit longer, so it broke that down into more frames of activity, or events if you prefer. Interestingly, it pays attention to the wheel movement, whether it's being turned by the steering, how fast the wheels are turning, whether or not the pattern indicates someone is actually driving it, or whether it's being winched onto the flatbed, which it does determine it's being driven. And it also pulls in other data from the interwebs to work out the motion intensity that it's detecting in the videos. I then ask it to compare this compiled data to the 2 data sets, the first being the alleged incident and the second being the alleged 3-point turn. For Trooper Paul's test videos, test 1, 2 and 3, AI says the key takeaways are: Test 1 had the most abrupt braking according to motion analysis. Test 3's braking, while visually seeming harder, does not show as extreme a motion drop as Test 1. The alleged incident claims an even more sudden stop than any of these tests, which is not yet supported by this dataset. I then ask it to compare braking timing across tests versus the alleged incident to detect inconsistencies, from which it finds Test 3 had the shortest braking duration, 2 seconds, making it the most abrupt stop. This matches your visual observation that Test 3 had a harsher braking event than Test 1. Test 1 had the longest braking duration, 7 seconds, meaning a more gradual stop. This contradicts the alleged incident's claim of a sudden reversal stop. The alleged incident's braking lasted 5.5 seconds, which does not match any test exactly. It is shorter than Test 1 but longer than Test 2 and 3, and if the third party was trying to replicate the incident, Test 3 should have had a longer braking phase, but it was actually the shortest. It points out the inconsistencies and implications. Test 3, braking was too short to match the alleged incident. Test 1, braking was too long compared to the alleged incident. And the third party's tests do not fully replicate the braking duration of the alleged incident. This suggests that none of the tests perfectly recreated the braking behaviour described in the third party's narrative, the third party being Trooper Paul. You'll note I was very careful not to alert ChatGPT that I was talking about a criminal case to eliminate any kind of bias it might have in leaning towards the state's arguments. I allowed it to think that we were talking about a civil case, a possible civil case. That way it didn't just assume that the third parties were absolutely correct just because they're police officers, which AI has a tendency to do. It breaks down the key implication, saying that the data doesn't support a high energy collision, and that if the vehicle truly struck at a pedestrian at 24 miles per hour, a forceful deceleration spike should be visible, and that the braking in the alleged incident dataset appears deliberate and controlled, not an emergency stop from impact. It then offers to compare this with real-world pedestrian impact crash data for reference, to which I agree, let's do that. It comes back with, upon comparing the alleged incident's longitudinal G-force data with real-world pedestrian impact studies, we've observed the following. Real-world pedestrian impact data would show injury patterns. Studies indicate that pedestrian impacts often result in injuries to the head, thorax, and lower extremities. Impact dynamics, factors such as vehicle speed, collision angle, and vehicle type significantly influence pedestrian injury severity. Comparison to alleged incident. G-force analysis. The dataset from the alleged incident does not exhibit the sudden longitudinal G-force spikes typically associated with pedestrian collisions. Braking patterns. The recorded deceleration appears deliberate and controlled, lacking the abruptness expected in an emergency stop following a pedestrian impact. Conclusion. The absence of characteristic G-force signatures and abrupt braking patterns in the dataset suggests that the alleged incident's telemetry does not align with a typical real-world pedestrian collision data. Next, I want to know, do any of the video tests data align with the key cycle dataset? ChatGPT replies, the braking and acceleration events in the video tests align closely with key cycle 1164. Key cycle 1164 contains multiple events related to sudden acceleration and braking. Repeated accelerator pedal opening angle events suggest deliberate acceleration and deceleration testing. The pattern resembles the behavior seen in test 1, 2, and 3, where acceleration is followed by controlled braking. Timing and consistency. The braking events in key cycle 1164 occur in rapid succession, similar to the test video sequences. This suggests that the third party's testing was logged as key cycle 1164 in the dataset. Inconsistency with the alleged incident. If the third party claims 1164 to 1167 were attempts to replicate the alleged incident, they must also acknowledge that the same dataset shows controlled braking and acceleration events, not a sudden crash event. It goes on to describe the implications. The video tests correspond to key cycle 1164, confirming they were logged in the dataset. None of the recorded events in 1164 to 1167 match the severity of a pedestrian impact. If key cycle 1164 is testing and key cycle 1162 is the alleged incident, why do they have similar braking/acceleration patterns? It seems pretty conclusive that that's the key cycle associated with that dataset. So now I want to do the same exercise. I want to compare the tow truck video with the 3-point turn dataset. Upon analysis, it does confirm the motion intensity data is indicative of active driver control rather than passive towing. It makes a number of key observations. to which it concludes the vehicle was actively driven onto the flatbed, reversed off and repositioned. Acceleration and braking patterns confirm driver control, not passive movement. If the third party claims that this was a purely towed event, the motion intensity contradicts that claim. In this particular case, it was several viewers who made that claim, not the third party. So I guess that answers your question. So next I want it to compare this motion pattern with the alleged 3-point turn dataset. When it does the comparison, it tells me that the motion intensity patterns of the flatbed video and the 3-point turn dataset do not match. After some more analysis, it finally concludes the 3-point turn dataset does not exhibit expected back and forth steering angles. Steering behaviour is more consistent with the wide radius turning or manoeuvring rather than a confined 3-point turn. If the third party claims this is a 3-point turn, then they need to explain the lack of expected sharp steering adjustments. Its key findings are: the gear shift patterns do not match a 3-point turn. A typical 3-point turn consists of 3 distinct directional shifts: forward to reverse, reverse to forward, the final adjustment to complete the turn. The 3-point turn dataset only shows one shift event, lacking the necessary second reversal. The dataset does not contain a neutral shift, which would indicate a controlled multi-step maneuver. Conclusion: the gear shift sequence does not align with a true 3-point turn. Instead, it suggests a single direction change, more similar to a standard reversing maneuver. It also says the motion intensity patterns differ between the two scenarios. The tow truck video shows acceleration, braking and readjustments, confirming that the vehicle was actively driven onto the flatbed. The 3-point turn dataset lacks sharp motion intensity spikes, suggesting continuous movement rather than stop-and-go turning. The motion pattern in the dataset does not match controlled deliberate stops typically seen in a 3-point turn. Conclusion: the data does not demonstrate the abrupt changes in speed and direction necessary for a 3-point turn. It also says the steering angles do not show expected lateral movement. A real 3-point turn should involve sharp alternating steering adjustments. The dataset shows some variation in steering angle, but these are gradual rather than abrupt back and forth changes. The largest recorded steering angle change is from -321.5 to 243, which does not indicate the tight manoeuvres expected in a confined 3-point turn. Conclusion: steering behaviour is inconsistent with a 3-point turn. Instead, the data suggests wider radius adjustments or manoeuvring in an open space. Final conclusion: the 3-point turn dataset does not support the claim that the vehicle executed a 3-point turn. The motion and steering behaviour align more closely with the general manoeuvring rather than a confined turning sequence. If the third party claims that this dataset represents a 3-point turn, they must explain the lack of expected sharp steering adjustments and multi-step directional changes. If the dataset was meant to replicate the tow truck movement, it fails to match observed acceleration and braking patterns in the tow truck video. So you may know in the last video it came to the conclusion that it must have been the tow truck video, but that was only given just the dataset and my description of what loading the vehicle onto the tow truck might have looked like. Now it's comparing the dataset with an actual video of the vehicle being loaded on the tow truck. Now it is more certain, given video evidence, that the alleged 3-point turn data is not associated with the tow truck key cycle. Well, it is disappointing because we did have some overlapping data that might have indicated it was. We still have 2 analyses that continue to conclude that the alleged 3-point turn data is not 3-point turn data. It would be interesting to see which key cycle records Trooper Paul left out of his analysis that triggered this event. Either way, we have firmly proven that event 1162 is not associated with Karen driving the vehicle. If you didn't see it, it's in the last video. This video was just an exercise in how well the AI can analyse video, movement in video, braking events, steering events, and wheel turning events, and assign some kind of data model to it so it can compare the data that we provided it with the data that it's pulled from the video. And I don't mind saying I'm not 100% confident in its ability to do these things. Analysing data and cross-checking it with real-world crash data, I have a bit more confidence in it being able to do that because it's been AI that has been doing this for the last 20 years for insurance companies. This whole video analysis side, this is fairly new to the AI industry, at least in the public sector. It's probably far more intelligent in the military sector, but even then I suspect it still needs a human to check its results. So this is my next mission. I'm going to sit there and time down to the millisecond every single triggering event that I can visually see in these videos, and then ask the AI to have another look at the data. Don't hold your breath waiting for that video because I might be a few days getting to it. I still have some mashups to catch up with, and now we have an SJC ruling as well. So until my next upload, cheerio!